Up until last year, the last time I actually enjoyed reading was back in 2004 when all I read was the Bernstein Bears and Junie B. Jones. So, here we are. These are 8 books you need to read in 2021, especially for someone who hates reading. I feel you on that because that was also me last year. But here I am dabbling in booktube. And I'm not a booktuber, so don't expect anything too crazy, okay? I wasn't a reader last year. I didn't necessarily enjoy reading for pleasure. These books changed that. Let's get into it. If you are someone who doesn't necessarily enjoy reading yet, I feel like fiction is the way to go. I haven't necessarily found my reading style yet. I haven't read enough where I feel like I have this one genre that I love, so I dabble in all the genres. This book, oh man, if you just want to be torn apart, have your heart ripped out from your chest, read this. We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. I am so in love with this book. It's a book that I would read again, but you can't read it again because the plot twist is so insane that if you would reread the book, everything would just be different. This is a book about a girl who every summer goes to this, I think it's like a private island with her other like friends and cousins, and they live there. She's a teenage girl and there's an incident that she cannot remember what happened. She had a terrible accident that happened to her, and the whole summer she's trying to figure out what happened. Without giving away too much, this plot twist will have you like this. It was a little bit harder to follow along at first, just because there are so many different characters, but once I got like maybe 100-ish pages in, I got familiar with all the characters and I was just sucked in. And a lot of you guys who said you read this because of my recommendation on my Instagram highlights said you loved it. So if you've been thinking about reading this is your sign to do it. After reading that book, I really felt some type of way and I was like, let's find another book that's going to rip out this. The book is called They Both Die at the End. It's by Adam Silvera. He is becoming one of my favorite authors, and this is what the cover looks like. You can kind of get a sense for the setting with this book. Like I said, it's based in New York City. It's about 2 boys who basically get their call to death. There's this thing called death cast in their society that calls you on the day that you're going to die. And they don't tell you when or how, they just tell you by the end of that day, you will be dead. That's why it's called They Both Die at the End. It's these 2 teenage boys who meet through this death cast thing because they both got told they were gonna die. They didn't know who each other were before then, and it follows along their last day. I was so intrigued to read this because I was like, do they really both die at the end? Like, there's no way an author would spoil it like that. So you gotta read it for yourself and find out. But let me tell you, there will be water, just straight water coming from your eyes. I get so easily attached to things, so these characters, oh my god. That was the type of book that took me less than a week to read just because I wanted to know what was gonna happen next. And speaking of Adam Silvera, I was so in love with his writing. The way he writes his books is something magical. He is, like I said, one of my favorite authors right now. This one was also one that so many of you guys recommended to me. It's called History Is All You Left Me. This is also another quite a tragic read. This one is also set in New York City and kind of California. It's about this boy named Griffin whose ex-boyfriend Theo dies. Theo had a current boyfriend named Jackson, so Jackson and Griffin have this tragic death that they bond over. This book switches off between history, so it'll go back in time and then it'll go to the current place in the book, which is so interesting. It all like pieces together. I'm gonna overuse this, but this truly was a page turner. I needed to know what was happening next. I needed to find out like pieces of information. There's a lot of shit that goes on in this book. Kind of a lot of love triangle square action. There's a lot of that. Griffin has a lot of issues inside his head. He is obviously being torn apart by this tragic death, but he's also trying to figure out himself, and he's got some other crazy things in his life going on. So if you want to read an amazing yet devastating book, this is the one. It is so well written. I fell in love with all the characters and I felt like I was there. The way it's written, it makes you feel like you are a part of this story, and that's what I love. This book tore me apart, so that's that. Just feel the need to throw out there is Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. She is the author of the iconic Twilight series. I am a die-hard, love it to death, and she came out with a book in Edward's point of view. So it is the original Twilight book, but in Edward's point of view, and it takes you into his mind, his world, his side of things, which was so interesting to read about. There were so many connections that I made that were just like everything was clicking. You kind of like connect the two with all the books, and all of the books that I just mentioned you can just read without having to read anything before it, but obviously with the Twilight series, there's a lot you need to know. So if you've already read the Twilight books, seen the Twilight movies, and you're familiar with everything that's going on, check out Midnight Sun. She was a fatty. She was like 700 pages long, so there's a lot to unpack in there, and there's just so much goodness. If you love Edward, you are going to love him more, even if you don't love Edward. I thought I was Team Jacob for the longest time, not gonna lie there, but now I think I've switched sides. When it comes to nonfiction, it can really just seem not fun. It's not a task that most people are drawn to, because it's kind of like, I'm already in school or I'm in college. Why do I need to read nonfiction? I don't feel like learning. That's how I was thinking too, but I was determined to broaden my horizons. I want to be someone who reads fiction as well as nonfiction. I want to be the complete package. Obviously you can have a preference, but these are some nonfiction books that I really like. One of them is a historical piece. Most of them are like self-help type books. Let's start off with the one that changed my life in 2020. This was the first book that I read in quarantine, the first book that I read in so long. That wasn't like for school, it was just purely for pleasure, and this is Atomic Habits by James Clear. You guys might have heard of this book because it is so widely talked about. It's a very popular book about creating habits, how to create them, why we need to create them, and tools to stick to them. If you saw one of my recent videos about 10 healthy habits to start in 2021 and you don't know where to start with that, you don't know how to stick to a habit, this is the book for you. I don't have too great of a memory about all of this, but there are just so many things that are highlighted in this book because there's so many good pieces of information that I took away that I applied into my life, and I think that's the best thing, when you can take something from a book, apply it into your life, and make your life better. This book did that for me. I recommend anyone read it. Basically, James Clear breaks down all of the 4 laws about how to create a good habit and also how to break a bad habit. This book is packed with information. This, darling, is the one for you. If you are in your mid-20s, early 20s, late 20s, this is a great read. The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now by Meg J, who has a PhD. So you know she's legit. This book is so interesting. It's written by a clinical psychologist who specializes in adult development and 20-something-year-olds. So all of those quarter life crises, crises? There's a lot that you go through in your 20s, and this book breaks it down. It helps you and kind of guides you through how to get through those circumstances that come your way that you don't know how to handle. I talk like I know what's gonna come and hit me during my 20s. I am freshly 20, so I don't really know yet. It was actually really interesting to read as someone who just turned 20, and this is the type of book that I would reread again later in my 20s just because there's so much good information in here. She does a lot of therapy with people who are also in their 20s. In this book, she goes over conversations she had with people who were in their post-college, post-grad life crisis. It was interesting to see the tips that she gave them while also later talking about how they applied her advice into their real lives and how it changed their lives. So there's definitely a lot of good information to take in this book, and clearly I am no expert at giving book reviews yet. This is my first booktube video, okay? But I love this review on the front. It says, any recent college grad mired? What does this word mean? Any recent college grad mired, I still don't know how to say it, in a quarter-life crisis or merely dazed by the freedom of post-collegiate experience should consider it required reading. A piece from history, and one that I have always been super interested in reading, was The Diary of Anne Frank. I'm sure you're all familiar with who she is because I feel like we learned about this back in like grade school, but it was never required reading for me to read her diary. There's a lot of different versions of her diary, ones that are a little more censored, but I just read the normal one. Oh boy, that one was a roller coaster of emotions just because it was weird to think that I wasn't reading like this tragic piece. I was reading something that happened in real life. So that was definitely a little emotional roller coaster to think that this young 15-year-old girl had to go through what she went through during World War II. If you don't know about the situation or don't know who Anne Frank is, I definitely recommend you look it up on Google. There's a lot to learn there. I became so much more educated about what happened to Jews during that period in history, and to read what this young girl wrote in her diary. The fact that it's published is like crazy. The fact that we have that is just insane. This is why I really am interested in reading more historical pieces, because I just feel like I gained so much more knowledge, and it's important to read books like that sometimes, especially ones about moments in history that happened that we do not want repeated. That definitely opened up my eyes to a lot of different things. It does get kind of heavy at times, but I think it's something everyone should read. The last book I want to give a mention to is one of my most recent reads. Unlike the other books that I shared, I feel like this one has more of a particular audience, so if this applies to you, you might want to check this out. It's called The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss. Escape the 9-to-5, live anywhere, and join the new rich. Doesn't that sound appealing? This book was recommended to me by one of my entrepreneur friends who owns a small business. Obviously, with what I do, I feel like this would have been a good read for me. So if you're someone who wants to be their own boss, be an entrepreneur, or maybe you want to still stick with your 9-to-5, but maybe make some adjustments to it and live life the way you want it, this could possibly be the book for you. I did find this book a little bit hard to get through at times, and there were little chunks that I did skip just because I felt like it didn't apply to me, or I just wasn't that interested. But overall, there were a few really cool concepts in here. So he talks about how you can outsource your life, how you can eliminate your work, be more efficient with your time, get more done, but make more money even though you're working less. I wouldn't say this is my most favorite book. However, if you are in that audience that this book is kind of targeting, I feel like there are things to learn from it, which is always super great. And that is it, my first booktube video. How did I do? Honestly, I don't really know what I'm doing. Like, the last time I wrote a book report, comment down below your book recommendations and your favorite reads that you read in 2020 or that you want to read in 2021. I'm so excited because one of my main goals for this year is to read 2 new books every month, so maybe you want to join me on that journey, whether it's 1 book every month, 2, 3, 4, I don't know. I'd love to hear some of your recommendations though, because all the books you guys have recommended to me have been amazing. Okay, that is all. Happy reading!